Hi, this is Toby, and in this video I'll be taking you out to the bush today and we'll be showing you some of the plants in Royal National Park. Now, the voice you're hearing right now is actually me sitting at home recording this voiceover, but you will see some footage of stuff that is over there. But I will just quickly talk over the first parts of this video. So, the track that we've walked, which I'll try and put a picture on screen, we got off at Waterfall Station and we took the Uloola walking track all the way to the campsite, where we then took the Karloo walking track out of the park. And it was a good day. There was a lot of interesting plants which you'll see throughout the video. And I didn't get a chance to record a lot of clips because I can't strap a camera to myself while I'm walking. But there were a lot of interesting things. So let's get started with the first part of the track. Now, it did rain the day before and some parts of the track at the start and at the finish were a bit boggy, but at the start there was only a short amount of bush before we entered kind of a fire trail and vehicle track. So it was pretty open and the sun was shining on the ground. There wasn't really a lot of cover, but there were some interesting things. Now, the first interesting thing that I saw were some sundews. And I've never actually seen these sundews in habitat before, so it was quite interesting seeing them for the first time. They were in some bright sunny area where there was free-flowing water. Not sure if there's free-flowing water throughout the year in that area, but it probably is quite moist where it lives. It was found on some rocks, and you can see on screen they're very interesting. They're quite small, but there are a lot of them and they were blooming. Now, along the side of the tracks, there were loads of different small shrubs, and one that was particularly interesting was Angophora hispida or Angophora hispida. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. It is quite an interesting plant. There were different stages of flowering. Some were in full bloom, some were already producing fruit, but those were around and you could notice them stand in the landscape. They were small shrubs, not growing too tall, but the flowers are pretty amazing. Another interesting small plant that was found along the track was Scaevola. Not sure what species of Scaevola this is. This is part of the Goodiniaceae family, and it's commonly called the fanflower, this type of plant, I believe. It's purple and the flower is shaped like a fan. I can't really say much more about it as I'm not quite familiar with this species. So another common plant that we saw was Lambertia formosa, or the mountain devil. It's part of the Proteaceae family and it has really beautiful red flowers. But the interesting thing is that the follicles it produces after it blooms is in the shape of a little devil's head. And I know on this picture you can't really see that. I'll put another picture up of a different plant that was located somewhere else with the follicles to show you what the devil part looks like, which do make quite an interesting feature on the plant. So we also saw some grass trees or xantharias. Again, not sure what species of xantharia this one is, the one in the picture, but this one had a flower spike. And xantharia is quite an iconic Australian plant, I would say. It is quite interesting. It produces a long flower spike and it is called the grass tree because the leaves look like grass. So here we have another iconic Australian flower, the Banksia. Or in fact, this one's actually Banksia serrata, the old man Banksia. And it flowers around now. It's quite an attractive plant. It is quite common. I've seen them around both planted and in the wild. It produces these lovely spikes, and I don't have a photo of the follicles, but they do develop woody follicles after the flowers are finished. And they do survive fire. I'm pretty sure Banksia serrata can actually survive fire, and you do need fire to open the follicles for it to reproduce. But I think Banksia serrata does have a lignotuber that allows the actual plant to survive the fire, whereas some of the Banksias that I'll show you later, like Banksia ericifolia, are killed by fires. So as we walked along, there were some parts where there were some larger trees growing on the side of the track. And in this picture, believe it or not, I'm actually showing you a mistletoe. Now, we do have mistletoes here in Australia. They do look a bit different from the typical northern hemisphere ones. Not sure what genus this one is because it was quite high up on this eucalypt and I couldn't take a good photo of it, but it is a mistletoe, and a lot of the mistletoes that grow on eucalypts actually look quite similar to the eucalypt in terms of the leaf, but the flower is very different. It is still a parasite and it does need energy from the eucalypt to survive, but I just thought there was something quite interesting to show you. So this was the only orchid species I found along the fire trail slash vehicle track. It grows near eucalypts. It's called Dipodium variegatum, the hyacinth orchid, or slender hyacinth orchid. There are a few species around this area. This one's Dipodium variegatum because the blotches on the flower extend down the ovary onto the pedicel. So that's one way to identify these, but these are somewhat common if you know where to look. They flower in November, and there will be more of this plant I'll show you later on when we reach the waterfall part of the walk, and there will be more orchids to come, but this was pretty much the only orchid I saw along the fire trail. There were plenty of them in some areas, but they are quite easy to spot if you know where you're looking. Another very small plant that was around the track was this trigger plant, Stylidium lineare. Now, stylidiums have a very interesting mechanism in which the flower, where the reproductive parts are actually cranked to one side, and if anything touches it, it will spring to the other side, and apparently they're proto-carnivorous. I haven't recorded a video of this stylidium moving the parts on the flower because it was quite small, but I will put another clip of a different type of stylidium, Stylidium productum, which has the same mechanism on the flower, just to show you how it works. It is quite interesting, and the part that moves, which is the reproductive organs, it can actually move back to its original place after it's been triggered, so they're quite fascinating little plants. Now, the final plant I'm going to talk about in this area are these hakeas. This is probably Hakea gibbosa, but these hakeas were found along the track, and hakeas, I find they are quite interesting. They're prickly little shrubs, well, mostly prickly little shrubs. They have really dense woody follicles, and some people find them quite boring, but I think they're quite interesting. The follicles open after fire where the plant is killed, and the seeds, again, regenerate the population. But there were different types of hakeas that were in this area, and this is just one of them. So that's it for the first part of the track. It wasn't too challenging. There wasn't very steep gradients we had to go up or down, and we've reached a campsite which is a lot more shaded, and there's a lot more interesting plants in my opinion in this area. And we'll head on over to some clips that I recorded on the day, so let's go and look at that.
Okay, so I didn't really record the first part of the walk. It was kind of just boring fire trail. But now we've reached a little place where there's a lot of water. It's a bit open, you get sunlight here, a lot of eucalypts, a few benches. Okay, so this area was just near that little waterfall. I've got a little rocky outcrop here, and look at this little colony of Cryptostylus. I think it's Cryptostylus subulata, the tongue orchid. I think these are their leaves, and there's a lot of them here. Let's look at the flower. Very, very interesting. The labellum looks like a tongue. That's why it's called the tongue orchid. I don't see any more flowers at the moment. I only see these two stalks flowering. Let's see what else there is around here. So again, there's a lot of Banksias here. I know it's a bit noisy. A lot of cicadas. This is just Banksia ericifolia, heathleaf Banksia. Very common around the area. There's another one over here. You can see the woody follicles after the flowers have died. Not too much here. There's some bush peas. I think this is just Potonea stipularis. Some bush peas. There's some lesser flannel flowers. Part of the Apiaceae family, the carrot family. I know it looks like a daisy. Let's see if I can focus on that. They're very small. Get a good shot of that. They're very small. Looks like a daisy, but they're not. The white things are actually bracts under the inflorescence. These are quite common around the place. A few grass trees here, Xantheria, Banksia serrata, also quite a common plant. some Petunia. Not sure what Petunia species this is, but it's a Petunia. I'll have all the names on screen. But again, very, very interesting place if you come out to the bush. Just walking around here. Oh, another little orchid. Dipodium variegatum, a leafless saprophyte. These are very common if you know where to look. These haven't opened yet, but very common orchid, very, very interesting. They bloom around November, December, so now's a good time. It might be starting to get a bit late for some of them, but you see there's one that hasn't opened yet. So a lot of cool stuff. Here we've got quite a big tree, and these are quite common around the area with this lovely reddish bark. Angophora costata, Sydney red gum. It's not actually a eucalyptus. The genus is Angophora. It is a bit different in terms of the flower morphology. It doesn't have the little cap that the eucalypts have, whereas these still have the petals or sepals, and the leaves are opposite instead of alternate. But again, very impressive tree here. There were some other Angophoras along the fire trail, mainly Angophora hispida, the dwarf apple. They call it apples because apparently when the settlers first came here to Australia, the flowers looked like apple blossoms. But again, another interesting tree around this area.
So after we left the waterfall, one of the first shrubs we saw was this Hakea teratifolia, the dagger Hakea, and it was in full bloom, and I do find it to be quite an interesting little shrub. The follicles are more elongated looking than your regular round Hakea follicles. Not sure if it's called dagger Hakea because of how spiky the foliage is or the shape of the follicles, but it is quite an interesting plant, and there were quite a few of these around the track, but this one was in full bloom. So another Proteaceae shrub we saw was this Banksia oblongifolia. It was kind of around the track as well, and at this section of the track it was somewhat open as well. There wasn't too many tall trees, but this Banksia, some of the plants were producing blooms, and I do believe it blooms in autumn, so it is a bit early for it to start producing flowers, but nonetheless it's quite an interesting shrub. So another shrub that I saw was this Grevillea, and I think it is Grevillea oleoides, although it is flowering really late for that species. It does have really lovely red flowers, and the plant was quite small. There were a few around the track, but it did stand out in the landscape. We also saw more sundews, the same species as before, Drosera spatulata. Again, these were in relatively sunny areas with kind of free-flowing water, and they kind of only appeared there where other parts of the track where it was sunny but there wasn't a lot of water, these plants seemed to be absent. So eventually we reached this rock, and we climbed up on the rock and we looked across the landscape. It was quite amazing. You could see all the trees, and there was no sign of any man-made structures in sight. It looked very natural. It was quite relaxing standing on top of this rock, and you can see the views are quite amazing. There were some few plants around the rock as well, some Hakeas and a few eucalypts, which I'm not sure what species they are, but again, it's quite an amazing sight. So another shrub we found near that rock was Grevillea buxifolia, quite a common Grevillea, I would say. It's quite easy to identify with these greyish flowers that appear at the tips of the branches. So after a bit more walking, there was a little rocky area where we took a break, and there were some interesting plants. There was this Darwinia fascicularis, the clustered Darwinia. I don't think I've seen this plant in the wild before. It is quite an interesting plant. The foliage looks like, I don't know, probably like a spruce needle, but it is part of the Myrtaceae family, and this plant is also flowering very late. It should have flowered in spring, but nonetheless it's quite an interesting little shrub. Another interesting plant from Australia, all the casuarinas and allocasuarinas, they're pretty interesting and they look very similar, but this one is allocasuarina distyla, which I kind of identified because of the pointed tip on the fruits, and it's not a conifer, it's actually an angiosperm. I know sometimes it gets mistaken for a conifer because it looks like a conifer, but those are actually modified stems that are photosynthetic. The actual leaves are very small and reduced, and this plant was just a small shrub that was growing along the rocks. Most Allocasuarinas are also dioecious, which means they are separate male and female plants, and because this plant is producing seed, it's obviously a female plant. So as we were walking along, I almost stepped on a snake, but other than that, we reached kind of a more shaded area, but there was still some scattered sunlight, and I saw this Cryptostylus subulata. There were flowers at different stages of development. Some were blooming, some had finished blooming and produced fruit, and there were even some of last season's fruit, I believe, because the fruit is still there and it's dried. But again, another interesting little orchid. So as we approached the Karloo pools, there was another common shrub that I saw, this isopogon. There are really only two different types of isopogons in this area, one with the broader leaf and one with the finer leaf. This is the broad-leafed drumstick, as they're colloquially known as, I believe, because of the inflorescence and the sticks make it look like a drumstick. Along with the isopogon, there was a very similar genus, also in the Proteaceae family, which can be a bit confused with isopogon. This is Petrophile pulchella. I think they're called cone sticks because instead of the inflorescence looking like kind of a ball shape, it's kind of cone shaped or egg shaped. And you can see in the pictures here, this one was flowering, and I even have a picture of the so-called cones on it. They do look a bit different, but again, they're in the same family, the Proteaceae family, and they are both small shrubs, so it can be easy to confuse them. So reaching the pool, there was a lot of people there taking a dip, and we had to try and cross it without getting wet, which was a bit of a challenge. But before we crossed the pool, we were looking around for a good place to cross, and I did come across this colony of ferns. I'm not super good at identifying ferns, but to me this is a Stichus flabellus, a shiny fan fern. It's quite an elegant fern, I have to say. It looks like an umbrella. I've seen a few of these around, but I can't confirm whether this is actually what I'm saying it is, but it's quite an interesting little fern that's growing next to this little creek. So eventually I found a nice place to cross this body of water. I managed to keep my socks dry because hiking boots do have a waterproof layer on it, and if you don't stay in the water for too long, you shouldn't be able to get wet. So I crossed over a shallow path, and the last bit of track was a bit challenging because it was quite steep. So we did come across this Dilwinia retorta, the heathy parrot pea. I think sometimes it's also called the eggs and bacon pea. Not sure why it's called eggs and bacon, but it's quite an interesting little shrub. It's quite common, quite easy to identify. It's got slender leaves that are twisted, hence the specific name retorta. It does produce lovely yellow flowers with a little bit of red markings in them, although I have seen some with orange instead of red, but very interesting small shrub, and it can be quite attractive in the landscape. So another iconic flower I would say is this Gymea lily, Doranthes excelsa. This one was producing a inflorescence. They are quite big. They're a monocot, but very interesting flower, really long inflorescence, or tall I should say, with red flowers at the tips. So obviously we saw some more sundews in, again, moist and sunny areas, and it was amazing how many sundews we saw throughout the walk. So another common flower we saw was the flannel flower. This differed from the lesser flannel flower in that it's much larger, but I'm pretty sure the flower morphology is the same. It's got the white woolly bracts and the inflorescence in the middle. So a very common flower you'll see in the bush, and I find that it's pretty much blooming most of the time, or at least throughout spring and summer. So a very easy plant to identify and spot. So we eventually conquered the steeper part of the track and we walked out of the track, we finished, but right at the end, I guess we'll finish off with this Hakea. I'm pretty sure this is Hakea sericea. I don't know how to pronounce the specific name. I apologize for my very bad pronunciation of these names, but another Hakea with its dense woolly follicles. But anyways, that was pretty much the entire day. It was a good couple of hours. I'd say it probably took us around 5 or 6 hours to do this with a few mates. It was very interesting looking at so many different plants. Didn't really see too many animals. We did see a lace monitor near the pools, which I'll put up now, but maybe the snake as well, which I didn't take a photo of because I scared it away when I almost jumped on it. But anyways, I think that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this style of video where I take you out into the bush and show you some of the natural flora we have here in Australia. I know most of my videos are in my backyard of me showing you how to grow plants, but I think it's good to show you some of the natural flora we have and the biodiversity that is present in some of the more natural areas. So I think we'll end it here. So anyways, thanks for watching this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below and I will answer them. But anyways, thanks for watching this video and I'll see you next one. Bye.